Welcome, everybody, to Unfinished Business Television. I am your co-host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions. And as always, the main man himself, Mr. Jeff Galashaw. Say hello.
Nadu, nadu.
And today we have a very special guest, a personal friend of mine, and an extraordinary filmmaker who certainly inspired my career. His name is Booker T. Mattison. He is an author, filmmaker, and professor. And for those of you who may not be familiar with his work, he had written and directed the BET original film, The Sound of Christmas, which stars Neo and Serayah and Draya Michele. And this movie was submitted for Emmy consideration for Outstanding TV Movie in 2023. And his most recent film, Twisted Marriage Therapist, is now playing on Tubi. And he is also a professor at Norfolk State University and
UGA, University of Georgia. I went to Norfolk State, though.
Yes, that's right. But you've been all over the world, so as far as I'm concerned. And you received your Master of Fine Arts in Film and Television at New York University, which we'll talk about New York Film Academy as well, too. I'm just really excited to have you on. So, Booker, as we ask all of our guests, what got you started in filmmaking?
I was a mass communications major at Norfolk State University in Virginia. And in my junior year, actually going back even farther, because I started college at community college, Tidewater Community College in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And in order to enroll, you had to choose a major. So I chose the discipline with the least amount of math, which happened to be radio and TV production. So I had no particular interest in radio, TV, or production in any capacity. But since it had the least amount of math, that was something that I thought would be favorable because, math had always been an Achilles heel for me. So I majored in radio, TV production at TCC for a year. And in the state, they disbanded the program. So that's when I transferred over to Norfolk State, which is a 4-year school. But in my junior year at Norfolk State, I did an internship. The Virginia Association of Broadcasters sent me to the ABC affiliate there in Norfolk. So because it was a prestigious fellow internship, I was able to, do all the various positions, write and edit and, all that stuff, and it would make air. But I discovered during that process that rather than covering other people's stories, I wanted to tell my own. At that point, I started researching film schools. Before that, I, the notion of one film school or being a filmmaker wasn't even something that was in my conscious mind. So I applied to NYU and got in. I only applied to NYU because at that time it was the mid-90s during the East Coast, West Coast rap feud. So I was a rapper and I was planning on coming out with a record deal. So, I didn't want to go to USC because I didn't want people to think I was a West Coast rapper. So that's how I wound up at film school and in my interest in film. And, once I got to NYU, I, started making short films and the way the program was structured, like most graduate programs, I was just making films as compared to, say, if you go to undergrad, you have to take your gen eds and that kind of a thing, and balancing production with, science and the other courses that you take. So it was then that I became a filmmaker, as it were. And here I am, I guess, 30 years later, chatting with you two. So I'm actually excited to be on and answer you all's questions.
Yeah, I mean, again, as always, I'm just excited even to have you here today. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when you attended NYU, did you take any of Spike Lee's classes for film?
Yeah, Spike, I don't know if it's still this way now, but when I was there, Spike taught third-year directing. So we all had Spike for third-year directing, which was pretty cool. And he did then and still now has the Spike Lee Fellowship for an African-American student. And I was fortunate enough to get that when I was there. And that $5,000 that I was awarded was the first monies towards my thesis film, which wound up airing on Showtime. The Gilded Six Bits, which I adapted from Zora Neale Hurston's short story, was actually my thesis film at NYU. So it was exciting to, have that air on Showtime. That was back in February of 2001. So fast forward to my first feature film in 2022, also an adaptation. So I adapted the novel The Replacement Wife, written by Tiffany L. Warren, who's a good friend and who's actually responsible for me booking that gig, because she pitched the idea of turning her novel into a Christmas film with me adapting it and directing it. Ironically enough, another connection, the exec that she pitched it to at BET was Larissa Bates, who I've known since film school and who was a producer on The Gilded Six Bits. So, the notion that it's not what you know, but who you know is actually true. And I say it in a different way. I tell my students that relationship capital is more valuable than any currency. And look, it's paying dividends even now, because we met, as you alluded to, at the New York, the summer program for the New York Film Academy. And here we are all these later. You wind up going to Emerson, one of the top film schools in the country, and now all these years later, we're on a podcast and joined by our homeboy, Jeff.
I know this is like jumping ahead, and I'm not trying to mean any disrespect, but The Sound of Christmas, you have Neo in the film. How did you convince him to not wear a hat for most of the movie? Because he's well known for always wearing, like a hat or a headpiece, even in, Red Tails. Was that like your suggestion, his suggestion? How did that come about?
It wasn't even a subject of discussion. And what I could say about Neo is that he was great to work with. He didn't, though he drove to set every day in his convertible white Bentley, which was pretty cool. There was no, I'm an international pop star energy, I'm the man. He was an actor. He was committed to working hard. And, I had a brief phone chat with him before production, and he was committed. I'm like, hey, I want to push you, not, just to, try to throw my weight around as a director, but more to be able to get the best out of him. And he was committed to that. And he did a really good job. And you mentioned the hat, at the end, the final scene when he has on the hat, I said, let's do that, because, that's, he was Quentin, but hey, it's the last scene. He's singing, publicly. So, hey, let's put the hat on and let's close this thing out with, Neo, as we recognize Neo in, his music career.
And also, looking at your resume in all your films, which I did, recently, I've noticed you're kind of like an actor where your next project is never quite the same as your last one. So it's like wide ranging. And I'm wondering, was that just the plan, or was it just how like each project lined up?
Yeah, it's very much like an actor. That's a great illustration, because, with most actors, until you get to a place where you are in a position where you can either afford to turn down work, or, and for most of us, it's what you can afford to do. It wasn't something that I planned. I was never a fan of musicals. However, when the opportunity came along to do one, I did my research, watched a ton of musicals. So this was, if you didn't catch it, it's a modern iteration of The Sound of Music, set in Atlanta with an African-American cast. So, of course, it's an adaptation of the novel, and that was one of Tiffany's favorite movies growing up, so it inspired the book, even though the book wasn't a Christmas story. But I also used a lot of visual references and conceits from the film itself. If you picked up on that, one of the most popular ones is, the first time we meet Neo, we meet him in shadow when he comes in the room and startles Montana, which, I totally stole that from the movie, where, he shows up in shadow. And there were, a number of things like, the frog, freaking her out and that kind of a thing. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun doing that. And I was excited to do a psychological thriller next, The Twisted Marriage Therapist. Again, it was that opportunity that was presented to me to do a psychological thriller. I didn't necessarily dislike psychological thrillers, but it wasn't something, hey, it's a psychological thriller, I must go out and see it. So, of course, that's a ton of psychological thrillers to prepare. And the one I'm working on now is a legal thriller. Same deal. This one is also a Tubi original, that we shoot in March. I just turned in the first draft of the script to the network last week. I'm actually waiting for network notes now. That's what I was telling Andre. I'm like, hey, let's hop on now, because once those notes come, obviously I'll be back underground, and then we don't have a lot of time for casting and all that other stuff. So I went from as far as features go, a Christmas film, a faith-based, family-friendly Christmas musical, to a dark and sexy psychological thriller, and the legal thriller is even darker. It's the story of a overconfident attorney working to exonerate her wrongfully convicted client. She discovers that he may be guilty of more sinister crimes, one that even threatens her own life. So it's without giving away too much, it's even darker than Twisted Marriage Therapist, because Twisted Marriage Therapist was very soapy. I don't know if you all have seen it, but it's very soapy. This is not soapy at all. It's it's a straight legal thriller with a dark story point. It's a serial killing ring. I mean, I can say that much, I guess, without giving away too much. So no, I didn't set out to do those three things. I am writing a commercial horror script on spec right now that I hope to get sold and get made. Now, if that happens, then it would be, hey, this is what I wanted to do. But even, that, I can't say that I always sat around saying I wanted to make a horror movie. I'm just being strategic, because if you try to do theatrical now, it's very, very difficult to get theatrical. And one easy way to do that is through writing a commercial horror film. So that was strategic, though I'm not necessarily a fan of horror films. I don't dislike horror films, but I don't go to see everyone that comes out at the box office.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you have a comedy in you in the future?
That's a great question, and I think that I would likely do a comedy if, again, I was hired to do one, because I'm very much a hired gun right now. I'm a writer director for hire, and if I was hired to do one, I would do one, and I think I would do a good job at it. But as far as me sitting down and writing a comedy, I on spec, it's different energy. With spec, there's no check, there's no guarantee it's going to get made. So I don't know if I could write one on spec, but if someone hired me to do one, I could do it. But I would like to, because I consider myself a funny dude. And then I say funny things, I think, but I would love to do a comedy. But I tried to do a rom-com once, and on spec. That's still a hopper. We'll see what happens with that.
Okay.
I feel like when I've seen, going back to The Gilded Six Bits, that's a thesis film that you did at NYU, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, this is really bold and ambitious from the standpoint that you're doing a period film where you have period clothing, cars, obviously your locations, and then later on with Sound of Christmas, you're having to do these musical numbers, and I'm thinking about the challenges you have to face for that, where you have to literally record these actors on set and then have to sync the audio later in post-production. So I have to ask, like, of all the films you did, what do you feel was like the biggest challenge for you as a filmmaker?
That's a good question. And I would have to say that the biggest challenge, long before I get to set, is my own personal confidence and my ability, facing the dilemma of the blank page. And Jeff, are you a filmmaker also? I know Draya is a filmmaker. Are you also a filmmaker?
I want to be a filmmaker. I'm in the writing stages right now.
Okay, so you were right. Okay, so you get it. So as you both know, the most horrifying thing is that blank page. And no matter what success you had prior to it, when you're faced with a new project, at least for me, I have a crisis of confidence. And I'm just like, can I do this? That's the most difficult part. And then actually starting, and getting through that first draft, because I'm at least constantly battling with, is this going to work? Are they going to reject this? Will I sell this? That fear of rejection, so before this, I was supposed to be working on the horror spec, and you know how it works. You're both writers. Because you are feeling insecure, that kind of a thing, especially with the internet now, you can get in these research rabbit holes, and you know exactly what you're doing. You know exactly what you are doing. You're procrastinating because you are afraid. So that's the most challenging part. for me as a filmmaker is getting to a place where the script, even now, waiting for these network notes. You know, they contracted me to do a treatment first, 2 drafts of an outline, and then first draft, second draft, and a polish. So I'm still waiting, saying, okay, what are these notes going to be like when they get back? And I know they can't be too terrible because they gave me notes on the treatment and the outline, and at the same time too, the green light date for this project is January 30th. So Tubi has to say, okay, based upon this draft, we're going to go ahead and green light it. Right. But there's always this fear. They're like, oh, this sucks. I'm not going to green light this. So not only am I out of money that I thought I was going to get, it's horrible for your ego and horrible for your own, self-esteem if they pull the plug on a project. And we both know, projects are deep sixed all the time in Hollywood. So I think fear is my biggest challenge, because by the time I get to set, I think, and I'd love to know what you both think as content creators, I think that writing is far more difficult than directing, because if you have a good script, it's very difficult to make a bad movie, but, it's like if you have a bad script, you're screwed. I don't care who you cast for actors. I don't care how good of a director you are, how good the DP is. Writing to me is far more difficult than directing. So by the time I get to set, it's like, hey, this is fun. I mean, not saying it's easy, but it's fun because there's actors and then there's departments that are helping you execute your vision. But yeah, fear on the one hand, and then 2, the writing process. Those are the 2 biggest challenges for me as a filmmaker.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, even for me, trying to get dialogue right, or even to make sure those characters don't sound alike, that they actually have some dimension to them. It's always rough. And then I always find myself in these blocks, where you think you're going in the right direction, and then you kind of get stuck on page 25. And that actually brings another good question to ask, because technology is changing so much. And with these strikes that we had recently, the biggest thing is with AI, and particularly with something like ChatGPT, where you can just regurgitate a story out. What are your thoughts on that, with how scary that part of the business is getting?
Sure. Well, I have ChatGPT-4. I have Copilot. I don't really use Copilot much. I mean, it's free, so it's on my phone. And ChatGPT-4, I use it even like in my class because I teach directing and screenwriting, but I have in the syllabi for both that it's forbidden to use. However, I'll have a conversation about that. And what I'll share with students is, as a student, your ability to generate ideas is far more, that's probably the skill that you need to develop the most as a student, because if you're in a writer's room, ChatGPT-4 is not going to help you. If you're in a pitch meeting, ChatGPT-4 is not going to help you. So if you're looking to ChatGPT, as if I'm speaking to my phone, if you're looking to ChatGPT-4 to help you generate ideas, that's one thing. If you're using it as a research tool, it's great. It's like Google on steroids, And in this script that I'm writing now, The Wrong Man, there are 2 instances where I used it. There's it's a legal thriller, so there's a conversation where the protagonist she files a writ of habeas corpus to get her client released. So I'm like, okay, what would a lawyer say to the attorney? And I gave the parameters, and the other part too is it's time consuming, because you ask for one question and it spits all this stuff. So I trimmed it down, rewrote it, made it work and fix. But because of all the technical and legal jargon, it was quicker for me to do that. But as far as actually story structure and the outline and that kind of a thing, it doesn't really work for me. And I'm not convinced that it yet is able to do that. Perhaps it'll get to the point where it can do that. And even in the horror script, that's a story of she's a Harvard PhD, and she I don't have my log line, is kind of whack right now, but long story short, her dissertation is on how white supremacy has been propagated through Christianity throughout, our time here. It even impacts us in modern times. So I actually had it spit out an outline for the dissertation based upon, what I put in there. So boom, that's cool. And that's great for me because I'm not a theologian. But again, that's not helping me do my outline. It's certainly not helping me craft scenes. It's not helping me do, so I think it's very useful. I'm curious to see how it will evolve. I think it's better suited to disrupt jobs and things other than writing and directing. And that's not to say that it won't eventually get to a place where it is. But right now, I don't foresee it being a particular threat. I'm thinking 5 years, 10 years down the line, perhaps. But even then, I don't know, because you're still going to have, someone come in and actually fix that stuff, because, you put in some parameters and it spits out all this stuff. Not all of it is useful. Some of it may be cool. So I'm not convinced it even helps you save time as far as actually writing your script. Maybe aspects of research and pieces of it, perhaps. But that's my view. I'm curious what you both think.
Yeah, I mean, I've used it sparingly, at least just to maybe get me out of the block once in a while, but I never I'm to the T gonna follow it. Like I might just take little things here and there and then just try to twist it up so it still fits my structure. I mean,
Right.
you showed me the book Save the Cat, so I've been using that quite a bit to help me with story structure and making sure, even if I just write like a rough draft,
Right.
I always go back and say, okay, am I hitting these beats?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm not, then there's something that's not working I got to go back to.
That's right. That's right.
For me, I have it on my phone, but I've never really officially used it for any of my writing. I think that's because right now I'm more focused on short films than anything else. So I'm more like dialogue heavy, with certain plot points, but I can see maybe again, like how you're using it for your legal thriller. If it was more something to help me along the way, that something I didn't 100% know about, and in the research it's still challenging me, then I could see using it as an aid and rewriting, what the information it's giving me. But I guess it's sort of it, to a certain extent, I can understand why certain people use it, but also like you were saying, with your students being forbidden, it feels like if you're using it from the beginning, it's sort of like using steroids at a sport, when you're just starting, and then you're going to have to depend on it more than yourself when you're in the heat of battle or in the heat of competition.
Sure. It is inherently derivative because it's taking things that it's been fed and regurgitating those things. And even if it, presents it in a unique way, what our goal is to not be derivative. Our goal is to, because there's nothing new under the sun. So it's to give you what you've already seen, but in a different way. So if you're really looking for ChatGPT-4 to help you be original, I think that you're going to, be waiting a long time for that to happen. So in another case in point, so I had an office hour appointment with a student last weekend in my directing class. Most of the students, they write their shorts. They have to do a 5 to 7 minute short. That's the culminating experience and what everything in the class is building towards. So she reads me what she had done in ChatGPT-4. She was honest about it. And it was first of all, she was saying she was reading acts, but they were actually scenes because it was about 12 or 13 of them, right? So I'm if there was acts, okay, so it's scenes. But then it's this theory of what could happen in a scene. She had no idea who the protagonist was. She had no idea what the protagonist wanted. And we all know that story is rooted in character and what a character wants. That's where your plot comes from. And then the antagonist, what he or she wants, and then that collision course you set them on is what creates the central conflict. So, that's not going to help her at all because she doesn't know who her protagonist is. She doesn't know who the protagonist wants. So I sent her back to, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, Dre, but it's called a bone structure document from Lajos Igri's book, The Art of Dramatic Writing. And it examines a character from physiology, sociology, psychology. It's just a series of questions. I use it on every project that I write because I need to know who the character is before I can get to the plot. So I sent her back to that. So it's she has all this stuff that she got from ChatGPT-4 based upon what she plugged in, which doesn't get her any closer to understanding what her story is about, how to write her script. So she just has this series of this theorem that ChatGPT-4 spit out, I guess, in her mind, thinking that it's going to help her. I'm not convinced that it does because I sent her back to figure out, well, who is the protagonist and what does he want? Which is the foundational question you ask before you start any story.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you did send that to me a while back,
Okay.
and I have been trying to follow that since. Now going back to your work, I think of all the movies I've seen of yours that you've done over the years, probably my personal favorite was Habeas Corpus.
Mm.
I love the father-son dynamic in that story and how much love that Chad Coleman has for Tim Reed, that he's willing to like try to bring him back to life. And it's heartbreaking, but also the fact that it's so uplifting at the end. I think the big thing for me was seeing Tim Reed in that film, and that was like, to me, like maybe the biggest star that you would work with up until that point. I mean, Chad Coleman's gone on to bigger things afterwards with The Walking Dead and The Orville, but I met Tim Reed years ago at the American Black Film Festival when he was premiering his movie For Real, and just wonderful, an inspiration like yourself. Was it challenging to work with him as somebody that, is a director and a producer, had a production company? Were there ever any challenges having to direct him on set?
Not at all. Even The Gilded Six Bits, I was a film student, but that film had Takia Crystal Kima, who, at that point had been on In Living Color and Cosby. Wendell Pierce, he's been in everything. The late great Novella Nelson, who had been in, like The Devil's Advocate and other things. So, having worked with these name actors, and that was Chad Coleman, believe it or not, The Gilded Six Bits was his first leading role. I mean, he had done, stuff on New York Undercover and, those shows back in the day. So I didn't have any intimidation. And also, too, going back to how I was raised, my parents were never starstruck. So, we never were. So even, as I've met celebrities or famous people over the years, and also I have the arrogance gene, which runs in my family. It's in my blood. I never really regard anyone as being, they're higher. I don't think my mom raised us, you're not better than anyone, but no one is better than you either, which I think was very healthy, independent of filmmaking. So getting back to your question specifically, no, I didn't have any issues or challenges. On The Gilded Six Bits, I did have I guess a pseudo clash with one of the actors. I mean, without saying the name. This particular actor, there was a scene we were shooting, and I call cut, and the actor, I'm not even going to say the gender because no clues, and the actor was like, "Let's go again," and I'm like, "No, we're not going again." Even though I did need another take, but I knew even back then, and I teach this now, having been directing and teaching directing for so long, that you have to maintain control of your set, not by being a despot, but by, if you allow people to, because Bill Riley was one of my mentors in film school. He said that every film set is on the brink of mutiny because everyone on there thinks they can do your job better than you. And I believe that to be true. So going back to this experience on The Gilded Six Bits, I needed another take, but I knew that if I would have let this actor start dictating when we're going again and all that stuff, that could have completely unraveled my entire shoot. And that had less to do with this particular actor being a name actor or famous, and more to do with that particular actor's ego and sensibility. So no, I mean, I didn't have any issues or challenges working with Tim. Of course, I was very respectful of what he had accomplished and grateful that he agreed to be in the short. But he was also wonderful, professional, again, eager to be directed, not, who are you? He's directed all these movies. And I'm a student. No, I'm getting my movies confused. Habeas Corpus. So he directed all these movies, and here I am, only done shorts, but he was great to work with. And that chemistry between Chad and Tim, and, Jamie Hector was in that. And at that point, Jamie, Jamie had been, The Walking Dead was over by the time The Wire was over by the time I'd done that. So, Chad had already been Cuddy, and Jamie had already been Mario. My name is my name. And at that time, The Walking Dead was the #1 show on TV, and Chad was on that. And we actually shot in the 2-week window, whenever they weren't shooting. I still don't think that Chad would have and considered a bigger star than Tim. I mean, I think more people probably, I don't know, maybe now, because, you know, he was the villain on Superman and Lois, Man, I think his name. So yeah, he's pretty big now. They might have been neck and neck back then, though. They might have been neck and neck back then as far as recognition. But no issues. And that, I think that's a testament to Tim and his appreciation for the process and his desire to help out younger filmmakers. So he's not going to be on set being a jerk whenever his career is about helping out younger filmmakers and a love for, you know, the process itself.
Absolutely. Was it tricky with the CGI flower, since he hadn't really done that in your movies before that? And I know placing it, trying to match move it, you know, what kind of challenges you had to deal with that?
That was my first time, you know, doing CGI. And I guess the biggest challenge was we had this silver ball that would, you know, and I don't know if they still do this now, because, you know, the visual effects I had, like in Twisted Marriage Therapist, for example, when they were different, you know, we weren't creating things like that. We were just enhancing what was already there. So I guess it's different. But we had this, you know, and I did my research and talked to some people. I had this silver ball that I guess would reflect the lights. So whenever the CGI artist, and he's the one who told me to do all this stuff, I didn't know to do this, that he could match the lighting and the placement of it. So, you know, actors playing towards a silver ball, you know. But is that really strange whenever auditions now are all self-tapes? I mean, they're reading in their room. I mean, maybe it's not an issue, but it was bizarre for me having to do that. But I wasn't the one, I guess, acting. But those extra steps of having the ball there and making sure that the lights were, you know, properly, you know, you positioned it so that he could see the lights whenever he was building. That was an added stressor to the process. But it was fun to do. And you know, I like to learn something new with every shoot. And, you know, Oliver Stone said that every time he does a movie, it's like doing it for the first time. And I totally understand that, because it's a new movie, a new world, new characters, new technical and production demands based upon what the story requires. So it was an extra step that I had to be cognizant of, because you get used to kind of going in a certain direction. I was like, oh, stop, we got to wait. It's like, you know, the first time you do a music video is, you know, it's like playback. You got to get used to that playback. It's like, oh, right. It's not action, it's playback and then action. So yeah, it was just an extra step. And it was a lot of fun to do, but it was an added challenge having to add that extra step.
But I guess this is like a question where you're going to have to go back in your memory. But when you completed like your first short film, whether it was for, you know, class or just, you know, after you had graduated, when you first saw like your completed film that you made, you know, obviously with the help of cast and crew, but once it was there, put on film tape in front of an audience, how did it feel like when you're seeing like an audience seeing it for the first time?
Sure. That's a really good question. And that I'd have to go back to community college for that as a radio and TV production major. So I partnered with, I think his name was Chris, he and, you know, me and a classmate, when we had to do, it was I forget what the story was, but it was like, you know, he was, you know, the car hit him and something like that. And it was, I don't know, it was very, very short. We shot on, I don't know. I know we edited on 3/4-inch tape. I think it was a very long time ago. This would have been maybe 1990, I think. But what was most intriguing, to get back to answering your question, I was most fascinated by the editing process. You know, match on action shots, and you can make it look as if a car is hitting someone. You know, and you know how we all know how to shoot that. You do the car, the movement, and you cut, and then you have somebody, you know, jumping out of frame. But I was most fascinated being able to sell that illusion of movement and space, you know, and time that we do whenever we're cutting. That was fascinating to me. It's like, wow, this stuff is not real at all. You know, we do willingly suspend our disbelief, but to be able to know how to shoot that and then pull it off. And it was very, very primitive what we did, but it worked. That was fascinating to me. And then when you show it to people, because you know what went on, you know, behind the curtain, as it were, whenever they're just, you know, they just see, this continuity of motion and action, and they buy it, and they respond to it emotionally. That was fascinating to me, because before that, I wasn't a visual communicator. I mean, I've been a writer for a very, very long time. So writing is one thing. It's one thing to be able to move people on the page, but now you're doing this with images. It was fascinating.
Okay. And also, your film Bird, that was the first film of your work that I saw. And I was wondering, like, what inspired you, I guess, to make that film in the first place? And would you be interested in making it more of a feature somewhere in the future? Mm.
Yeah, that film is an example of I lacked what I call aesthetic courage. I was always horrified by the notion of going to jail, number one, because I was always this big, always looked very young. I'm 53 now. I look my age and I put on pounds. But imagine I'm young, right? And then a couple of my friends actually got locked up who were skinny and like me. But I was always horrified by the notion of, one, going to prison, and two, being sexually assaulted in prison. So I was in my 40s when I did that. But that was a horror for me, because I grew up during the crack epidemic, so people were getting killed and going to jail just back in the 80s. But it wasn't until my 40s where I had the courage to address that. And that's something that happens a lot. And it's not something that's discussed at all. So that was the inspiration behind doing that. The fact that there's no on-camera dialogue, I don't know that I necessarily set out to do that. But one thing that I always tell my students is that, my screenwriting students, is that dialogue is a sound effect, because we're trafficking in subtext, whenever we're working at a high level. But that movie proves that, because a lot of people watch that movie and not even realize that there's no on-camera dialogue. There's a couple of off-screen lines. I think there's two. I think it's shower time and guilty, I think, are the two lines, but they're off-screen. So it was also fun making that, to be able to communicate. Well, one, to write that script, there's no dialogue, and then to be able to shoot it. And, the entire movie, or at least most of it, is in flashback, and it takes place over the course of 10 years, which is also fun to do. And relate, it's not exactly answering your question, but I think it's an interesting tidbit that might be informative for your audience. Every time I gave that script to an actor, that I wanted to audition, their first response was, "There's no dialogue," as if somehow that was going to make their life or their job or their audition more difficult. And I see that even in students, in my directing classes. They're like, if there's a scene, there's no dialogue, and somehow that scene is less important than a scene with dialogue. I'm like, are you kidding? They pull in sides for auditions. Well, we have to have dialogue in it. Well, do you? You're going to have to shoot this, aren't you? Right? So that was a fun film to make for all those reasons. But the inspiration was one that was long in coming, and I finally, decided I wanted to do it. But then also the wrongful imprisonment piece, and lo and behold, I'm dealing with that theme again now, all these years later. But yeah, the being locked up, sexual violence in prison, and wrongfully being accused is a reality that, a lot of mostly Black men, we're most of the people who are, in jail for, being wrongfully convicted, most of them look like us. And, there are some women, but they're mostly men. So this is something that happens a lot in our community, to us. And it's not something that's discussed. And I'll share another quick story, because I know you all have more questions. So I screened this movie once. There was a guy, he was, I guess he was like a maintenance guy or something. And he came to the house, and for, I don't know how I wound up, maybe he asked me what I did or something. So I was showing him the film. So, I like to watch movies from the back of the theater, so I can see the audience's reaction. So in this particular instance, it was on my TV in my house, but I had an open floor plan. So, you have the TV, then you have the couch, and then you have the kitchen. So I'm in the kitchen, he's on the couch. And I can see that he's watching this and getting, really uncomfortable and really impacted by it. And when it was over, he told me that he used to be an enforcer in prison, so, and he said it really impacted him. And he, I don't know what that enforcement meant, but the point is, it really, really got him, and he was a person who'd been locked up. People weren't brutalized, he was, solid dude. People weren't brutalizing him, but I don't know how he was brutalizing people, and then, okay, this is the last story that I could think of. So then I had two friends who were sheriff's deputies, and the sheriffs run the jails. Showed them the movie. It was over. It was like, that's the way it really is. And I was like, okay, success, right? I mean, they work in the jail. It's like, that's the way it really is. So that made me feel really good, as disturbing as it is, because even when I watch that movie now, it breaks my heart, because that close-up of his hand is the most horrifying image in the movie to me, whenever, the assault is happening. But yeah, that was a pretty, and I think as far as my shorts go, that's certainly, I think, one of my stronger shorts. Interesting, Habeas Corpus, going back to that, that's a very polarizing short. People either love it or they're like, what in the heck is that? Right? Because they're like, what's going on here? But if they get it, oh, they absolutely love it. And I also use that film. I teach this class called The Short Film, A Lens on the Human Experience. And we watch a short film, and then I teach the students basic film analysis. But essentially, it's them responding, when the movie's over, before they hear what anyone else thinks. They respond, 10 minutes response essay, and then they submit it, and then we discuss. I have one person read. But it's always incredible how rich and how much depth the discussion is, because there's so much symbolism, the themes, pick one. They love. Well, I don't know if they love writing about it, but it's some of the most involved and illuminating discussions from showing that film and having students analyze it.
With Bird, and then the next two shorts that you did, Bosniak and Who Are You? Sorry, I can't pronounce the actual.
Ungabani from Remember Black Panther when they brought in, like, Who Are You?
The thing, it felt like that was a whole trilogy on race relations in America, because they were dealing with racial profiling and identity crisis. Was that a deliberate decision, like based on everything that was going on? Not just, I mean, some of those movies were dated before George Floyd, but everything that was happening in America when it came to race relations and all these tragedies, were those things that inspired you to write those films, or was it just a universal, like, this was your calling?
That's also a very good question, and no, I didn't intentionally set out to have any type of a link or through line between those films, and at the same time, I often say that as an artist, your work will tell on you, whether you realize it or not. So that's why it's so important to be intentional in what you want to say. But no, I hadn't thought about that. That's actually a very good. It's a great observation, but I think that really speaks to those things that I'm passionate about, and passion can be positive or negative, either what makes you angry and what deeply troubles you, or what makes you extraordinarily happy. So yeah, I think that's just a reflection of the issues, the themes that are dear to me, and the things that I want to say to an audience. But no, I hadn't thought about it, but you know what? What's in you is in you. You can't really escape it. It's going to come out in your art. And it's also going to come out in how you interact with people and that kind of a thing. But I know we're specifically talking about art, but it's going to come out. And I guess that's what I was. And even, even now, it's like I think almost every movie that I've made, if I'm not mistaken, has the police in it in some form or fashion.
Somebody gets arrested.
Yeah, there's and think about it, as Black men, and Black people, that has been a reality for us since we've been in this country, being policed and watched. Even before it was a police department, when it was overseers, we always have this person, this entity, this system that's watching us, that will take away our freedom, or that supports a system where we don't have our freedom. So it's amazing to me that there's always a police presence, a law enforcement presence. And if I'm not mistaken, it's, well, the Guild of Sixpence didn't. I think that might have been. But almost everyone, there's something in there about law enforcement, which obviously that's something, and it does trouble me, because it's like, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm an upstanding part of the community, and I still carry with me. I mean, I'm not like leery when I see a police officer. but a police officer can never pass me and I don't see it. It's never a part of the wallpaper for me, and I'm not afraid because I don't have anything to be afraid of, but it's never a part of the wallpaper. Oh, a cop car? Oh, I didn't see that car. 100% I do. Every time. Oh, there's a police officer in the mall or whatever it is. Not that I think he's going to come get me, but I see him, which speaks to what's inside of me and how that impacts me personally.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, my question, do you have any particular favorite films or films that you find yourself usually watching maybe for inspiration or, to like get you back into like a filmmaking spirit and the joys of, cinematic expression?
Really good questions, guys. So the answer to that question is no, and let me qualify that. What I watch tends to be what I'm as research for what I'm working on. So like, I watched like over 40 horror movies from around the world, when I was preparing to do the horror spec. Right now I'm watching legal thrillers, right? And I'll go back to the classics, like I just watched The Rainmaker yesterday, so I'm going to watch, Pelican Brief, Firm. I'm going to, all the ones. I'm watching season 4 of True Detective. I love the first season. I didn't care for, seasons 2 and 3. So when I'm working on something, I watched, The Sound of Music. I watched La La Land. I watched In the Heights, when I was preparing for the musical. So I will always go back to the classics based upon what it is that I'm researching and preparing to do. So, and even like, okay, and another thing is when I teach certain films, like, so in screenwriting, whenever I'm going over, David Trottier's The Magnificent Seven Plot Points from his book, The Screenwriter's Bible, I use Training Day. So I show that every semester. We go through it and I point out, the 7 plot points, and I think that Training Day is a great movie. Well, one, because it shows the difference between a central character and a protagonist, and usually they're the same character, right? But that's an example of how, Denzel is the central character. He drives the action, but the protagonist, the person whose story it is and who is the emotional center and who's, we're following his heart and his life and his desires, is Ethan Hawke. So I show that every semester. And then when we go over Snyder's beat sheet, getting back to what Andre was talking about, I show Hidden Figures and we go through the script and I point out the 15 beats, so I show that every semester. So it's either what I'm working on or what I teach. So, I guess the only movies that I watch repeatedly would be those ones that I teach. It's rare that I will go back and watch a movie, because I love it so much. I'll tell you what I do for inspiration. Old school hip hop. Well, it's not old school because then you start thinking Grandmaster Flash and stuff. It's the golden era, 80s, the 80s era, late 80s, early 90s hip hop. When I need inspiration or I'm frustrated, I'll go and listen to that. Because then it's like, as a former rapper myself, I feel like, okay, this is dope what I'm listening to. What I'm writing has to be doper than that. So it inspires me.
Yeah.
So, I think back to our time when we were in New York Film Academy and, you and Mike Sandoval and everybody, Peter Mortimer, like teaching us how to shoot with 16 millimeter Aeroflex cameras, and Tanya Steele teaching me how to cut on the Steenbeck tables, and how tedious and how difficult that was always to get right. Mm-hmm. And now I look at today where everything is digital and you could shoot on your phone, you can edit on your phone. Do you feel like there's more advantages now for independent filmmakers, or do you feel like something's gone lost as we've gone away from the analog age?
I think that there are far more advantages and fewer excuses, because, we always will have talkers, they're talkers and not doers. So, now it's like, oh, I want to make films. Okay, well, what's stopping you? You got a 4K camera in your pocket. Well, you get free screenwriting software, free editing software on your phone. So you want to be a filmmaker? Well, why aren't you making films? And what really frustrates me are people, friends, colleagues, someone in their family says, oh, I want to make films. And they want to, hey, well, talk to Booker. No, I used to do that, years ago. I don't do that anymore because it's like, you know what? Sorry. people pay me for me to tell them what you want me to tell you on this phone call, you know? And again, you know, I'm not trying to act like I'm all that, because I'm not, but it's like, I don't have time. If you want to figure it out. Now, if someone is serious, that's very different if they're serious and they've demonstrated their seriousness, you know, by doing something. But if you, I want to make movies. Oh, time to talk to Booker. Well, no, it's not time to talk to Booker. Go out and do some things, you know. And if you were really interested in making films, you would have already made some. Just like when I was an undergrad, I was a mass comm major. It was radio and TV production. I mean, it was like for radio, television, news gathering, being a reporter and anchor, all that stuff. It wasn't to do narrative stuff, but I was, you know, using my brothers, my girlfriend at the time, shooting these little short, primitive narrative movies. Why? Because I was interested in it. I didn't have to go talk to someone about it. And I'm not trying to denigrate the value of talking to people and being a mentor, but it's like, talk to me after you've done some things, you know, because I, you know, what am I going to tell you exactly? You don't even have a frame of reference to even ask intelligent questions if you haven't done anything yet, you know. And then we don't have the barriers to entry like 16 millimeter film. Who has a film camera in their house? Nobody. You had to go out and pay, you know, for Kodak film, and then you had to get it developed. That was the cutting on a Steenbeck, as you mentioned. That's a totally different experience, because the access, the barriers to access were so high. Well, what do I do? How do I get in? Now, I'm not having these conversations with you, these elementary conversations of what you have to do and how you have to get in. Sorry, because I don't have time. One, I'm too busy. And two, you got a 4K phone in your pocket. This produces prettier images than that 16 millimeter film that we used to shoot on.
Yeah.
But yet you want to ask me, what do I need to do?
No hairs on the gate.
Right. Oh, check the gate. Right. Oh my goodness. Right. So it's like, no. And then, you know, here's the other part. This, you know, now with digital, it's like, you know, people don't cut, you know, and I'm yelling cut and they're still rolling. Right. And I'm like, when I say cut, I mean cut, you know, not, oh, we're still rolling. And it's like, oh, we're still rolling. No, cut. I was about to use a curse word. Cut, you know, because now, oh, we don't have to cut, you know, because you're not paying for film, but you know what you're doing? You're giving your editor all this footage that they have to sort through, right? Which makes their job so much more difficult. So cut, right? So there are certain disciplines that have kind of gone out the window, like cutting.
And hard drive space.
Exactly. So, you know, it's like, and then the editor's going crazy. It's like, you know, and people are rolling. Why are you having all these conversations with actors and relighting? They're still rolling. It's like, what planet are you all on? Right. So there are some things that I think, like those disciplines that have gone out the window. But overall, I think it's far better because, you know, even, you know, beyond, you know, the 4K phone in your pocket, you can post your stuff on YouTube, you know, and Vimeo. And, you know, I mean, film festivals are still cool, but, you know, people can see your work and, you know, you have global distribution at the click of a finger, which is pretty amazing if you ask me.
Yeah.
So also, because I have two more questions for you before we start wrapping up,
Sure.
unless Jeff has anything else. But you teach, you've been now starting to see some progress with your career, making films for Tubi, making films for BET, and you have a big family. How do you juggle all that?
You know, the being a professor at a Research One university, which University of Georgia is, the workload is such because they expect you to be teaching what you're doing. There's no conflict there. So I teach full time. For me, it's 2 classes, 2 days a week, and the rest of the time I'm not just, you know, hanging out, you know, blowing smoke out of my rear. I'm actually pitching, writing, directing, making movies. So there's no conflict there. But the biggest challenge for me though is, you know, it was one thing when I was writing and directing shorts and being a professor. That's a perfect marriage. But writing and directing features and being a professor, it's I need a break. I mean, I've done 3 features in 3 years. You know, Wrong Man's my 3rd one, and I've done 6 films in 6 years because before that I did 3 shorts. You know, because I was doing a short a year to make tenure. But again, that's far more manageable doing a short than, you know, a feature, because with me writing it and directing, it's a 1-year commitment. So that's been the biggest challenge. And, you know, doing these originals for these streamers, you know, I'm not making the money where I could be like, hey, I'm gonna, I do this full time because I make more money as a professor than I do on these movies, these low budget features for streamers. So that my biggest challenge is I'm often working 7 days a week. I'm often, and this is not because someone tells me what to do. No one tells me what to do as a professor. No one tells me what to do as a writer or a director. But there are demands and requirements and deadlines that you have to hit, and I have to do those. So I'm often working 7 days a week. Inspiration doesn't know that it's 3 a.m. or that it's a Tuesday afternoon. You have to get it down when you get it down. So that's my biggest challenge. And, with my kids being older now, my kids are now 21, 20, 18, and 16. I'm glad that the career with the features didn't take off when they were younger, though I wanted that to happen. And I felt like I was equipped, but, God had other ideas. But I'm glad that things are now starting to take off, that they're older. My youngest she's in high school. Everyone else is in college. So it works for me because, now they're not going to be like, oh, well, daddy's not at home or daddy's away and that kind of a thing, because they're older now. So, we always, want things that, and think we're prepared and equipped for things, and, not to make this a religious thing, but, God knew where I needed to be and what my family needed from me. And though I was on pause for all those years, it took me 23 years to make my first feature after film school. That worked well for, my family. My family wasn't negatively impacted by me being off, making films. So yeah, it's been the balancing act now is not so much family and filmmaking in school. It's more filmmaking in school because of the demands of my time doing, writing and directing features now as opposed to shorts.
And I don't want to leave you without mentioning your books, Unsigned Hype and Snitch, which, I've read and are amazing. And, I got to ask, because since not everybody's familiar with your work, are there plans to get those produced into films one day?
100%. And, from the time I wrote both, the idea was to get them made. And, they've been in various stages of, people optioning and, me writing these really bad scripts that I couldn't get sold. But now that I'm a much better writer and know what I'm doing far better than before, now the spec work, if paid work comes in, it kind of bumps it out of the way. But my goal is to both do Unsigned Hype and Snitch. The challenge is, well, I guess what would be great is if I'm able to pitch them and then I can get paid to do it as opposed to doing it spec. It's more likely to happen. But even, with The Wrong Man, I was planning on finishing my horror script after Twisted Marriage Therapy, and then boom, The Wrong Man comes. So what happens to the spec script? It has to take a back seat to the paid work. But yeah, that's certainly a goal. I want to make them both into films. And, now with limited series, it's giving you a kind of a broader palette to paint on. I think they both could be even more effective as a limited series. And though, come on, who doesn't want to do theatrical? That's everyone's goal, even though that's such a small window and it's an opportunity for so few filmmakers. But, TV and streaming is where it's at.
Jeff, any last questions?
Well, mine is a minor question because you pretty much answered any questions I could have had, or Andre beat me to the punch, so to speak. So I'm just going to ask a small trivial question. In Bird, the prisoner who does the assault, he has this strange beard. Now, was that his original, or did you put that little detail in there?
Yeah, so the hair and makeup person. So there was a basketball player, Drew. What was Drew's last name? He played for Kansas in college. He was in the NBA, and he had that crazy looking thing. And I'm like, yo, that would be great for forget the character's name. So that was like, fake hair, twisted into the actor's, Zeus is his name, Zeus Campbell, twisted into his beard. And I just thought that would be great as the character, because the character is so strange. But yeah, that was something that, I was inspired by. I can't believe I'm forgetting Drew's last name. This is years ago. But yeah, that was a nice detail that was in the script. And I had to, get someone who could do it. And it, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm glad you noticed that, because that's one of those details that often go, people don't notice it.
Okay. And I just want to thank you for sitting down and since you have such a busy schedule, especially sitting down to talk to us, because this has been just inspirational and very informative. One of our most technical interviews and fun interviews we've had. And
Well, I appreciate you both. I mean, it's always a wonderful opportunity to answer questions about the process, and I also love to answer really informed and well researched questions. And of course, Andre, my man. Well, how many years? Ray, what year was that?
God.
Dalton?
I was 17 when I met you.
ow.
I'm 40. I don't even feel like it.
It's nuts. So it's been, help me with my math. 40 minus 17 is what? 23? 23 years.
Mhm.
Whoa, that is nuts. Yeah. So look, thank you both for having me on. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I also enjoyed the questions.
Yeah, we would love to definitely have you back when you have
Yes.
the film on. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, you've been an inspiration for me all these years. Somebody I could always fall back on, from a technical level, on a personal level, and to see your success from being my mentor to now seeing you have these films on these major networks and streaming platforms, it gives me that hope that I could reach that level someday if I just keep going and just to stick with it, no matter what kind of nonsense I have to cut through to get there. So I'm truly eternally grateful to have you in my life.
Oh man, I appreciate it, Dre, and then the feeling is mutual. And my wife, all the people that come through my life, young people, she actually knows you and remembers you, which and because again,
Oh, I said hello, by the way.
oh, I will. It's so many, so she knows you, which is saying a lot. So yeah, and I'm happy to come on. You let me know when you want me to come on. I mean, we shoot March 4th. So it's a 3-week shoot. So, anytime after that, if you want to do that, cool. If you want to wait till, when the movie's done, you let me know. I'm happy to return whenever it's convenient for you both.
Yeah, holiday break, whenever it's all out and we could talk about it.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thanks again. And really enjoyed chatting with you all.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
All right. Later.
Well, that ends this week's business. But as you know, we always have unfinished business. Definitely please look up Booker T. Mattison. He is on Vimeo. You can see his work there. You can also find his films, The Sound of Christmas, that is on BET Plus or Amazon Prime. And Twisted Marriage Therapist is available on Tubi. And that ends this episode, and we will see you guys next time.
If you like this review, please be sure to like and hit subscribe to be alerted to new episodes in the future.